Mike Allen on LBC Radio. Phone 353-8111.
LBC Radio, I'm Mike Allen. Your calls on 353-8111 to my guest, Jonathan Goodman, the crime historian, Bill Waddell, the curator of the Black Museum at Scotland Yard. Just before the news headlines, Bill, we were talking about some of the odd and macabre and, well, I can't think of another word to describe them, unfortunate instruments that have been used by people. Do you see some sort of parallel between those and some of the wacky things that you see in James Bond movies that are used?
Well, they certainly are bizarre, some of them. Some of the methods used for killing have all the feel of James Bond about them, and one would expect them only to appear in books like that. But when you look at things like the case used by the Krays, which had a hypodermic needle in it for killing witnesses, when you look at the Markov pellet and the way that was injected into Georgi Markov, one does wonder a bit whether we are alive and well and living in the world of James Bond sometimes.
Tell me about that Markov pellet, because not everyone may remember that. What was that?
Well, it was Georgi Markov who was standing on the south side of Waterloo Bridge in 1978, and he felt a blow in the thigh, and he turned around and saw a man picking up an umbrella. The man got in a taxi and drove away. Georgi Markov was working for the World Service at the BBC, and he went over to Bush House, and there a friend of his had a look at the back of his right leg, and they found what was later described as an angry red spot. As time progressed, it was found that Georgi Markov became increasingly more ill and was admitted to hospital, where subsequently, sadly, he died. When the post-mortem was carried out, it was quite appalling what had happened to him. And as a result of that, a tiny little pellet, about 1.53 millimeters in diameter, was removed from the body. And it has two holes electrosparked through it, and in these holes was contained a poison called ricin, which is believed to have killed him.
So there you are, the curator of this chamber of horrors, and
mausoleum of crime.
Yes, well, there it is. Yes, and on the other side, there's Jonathan, a historian of crime. Tell me, Jonathan, do you think many crime writers, not necessarily historians, but crime writers, have taken inspiration for novels and things from things they might have read of or seen in the Black Museum?
Two sorts of crime writers: the fictional sort, and there's me.
Yes,
less fictional.
Less fictional.
One rather wishes that the fictional sort did pay more attention to the things that Bill has been talking about. For instance, it's quite a normal thing in a crime novel for a pathologist, Dr. Binks, to turn up and say, oh yes, you look at the body and say, oh yes, this man died between about 2:30 and 3:15, 3 days ago. Well, this is entered the sort of the fabric, I mean, of understanding, in inverted commas. Programs, to some extent, like Quincy, have added to this belief that forensic people are gods. I mean, most of them are pretty clever chaps, but it can be awfully dangerous, because we have the example of, for instance, Bernard Spilsbury in from first 50 years of the century, I guess, who was a brilliant pathologist, but he wasn't as brilliant as people made out, and he would get into the witness box, have his say, and nobody could argue with him. And there are at least 3 instances I can think of where innocent men were hanged, or guilty men were acquitted. One instance is Donald Merritt. There's perhaps the most grisly exhibit in the Black Museum, which Bill can tell you about. I mean, this man, he was originally, his real name was Chesney. He was put on trial in Edinburgh for the murder of his mother, was acquitted basically on the evidence of Spilsbury, for once acting for the defence, and Robert Churchill, a gun expert. Both men paid to say what they said. 20 20 years later, he murdered his mother-in-law and his wife. And I'll perhaps pass the rest of the story on.
Yes, I think pathology's come a long way since then. There's the techniques in forensic sciences today, over the last 15, 20 years, have improved enormously. When you're talking about Merritt and the case of John Donald Merritt, he got away with it in the first instance, and of course he committed a murder again. And today we find there are cases where people who are convicted of a murder, of course, commit a murder a second time. But when you look at the techniques that we use today, they built into them the tests to try and ensure that we don't make mistakes and that they get the thing right. It's changing all the time. We're using new techniques on a daily basis, practically. Not quite as often as that, but we've got this genetic fingerprinting coming in, which is another move forward in identifying individuals. All these methods are gradually improving, and as science improves, so do the forensic science methods improve.
How much of a percentage of detection of crime are these new techniques that you talked of now improving it? Would you say it's like a 20% increase in detection of crime because of this, or?
Oh no,
or is it too hard to put a percentage on?
That's a difficult figure. It would appear that we're just about holding our own in resolving crime, and it could be argued that we could resolve a lot more crime. But there is a limit to this. How many crimes are being committed and the escalating rate of it, and the number of detectives available to deal with it.
And the ingenuity of the criminal mind in adapting, obviously, new techniques.
Yes, I think Jonathan and I, having looked at criminals for a long, long time, would say that we've seen ingenuity in criminals going over many years, haven't we?
Yes, I don't think ingenuity is a new thing. In fact, I think this ingenuity, or the belief in ingenuity, is almost a sine qua non of a criminal. It is the fact that he thinks he's cleverer than everyone else that, in a lot of cases, will make him commit crime. You know?
Yeah, sure, I understand.
I mean, I'm very loath to suggest motives for criminals or things that spur criminals to become criminals, but I think there's no doubt that in some cases that is so. I mean, it works the other way around, that clever chaps become criminals. Charlie Peace, who is one of the hero figures in the Black Museum. I mean, the Black Museum has a lot of his homemade gadgets.
What did Charlie Peace do?
He was a burglar, and he killed a PC cock up at Manchester, sat through the trial of the Habron brothers while they were tried for the murder he committed and were sentenced to life imprisonment. And then he came down to Sheffield, where he murdered Dyson, Mr. Dyson. And then he ended up down at Peckham, where he used to go burgling, as they say. And he was caught burgling down at Blackheath. And he stood trial for attempted murder of P.C. Robinson. He stood trial under the name Ward, which is rather interesting, because in those days they didn't have the way of matching up photographs, and they didn't have fingerprinting, of course. And he stood trial, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and whilst he was in prison he was identified as Peace, wanted for murder, and he was taken back up to Leeds, where he was tried for the murder of Dyson, found guilty, and ultimately admitted the murder of Cock as well before he was hanged. He was a very ingenious burglar. He had this remarkable ladder that there's a photograph of in the book there, and which used to fold up into 15 by 9 by 2, and you could put it in a tiny attaché case.
You think, I've sometimes wondered whether the 1930 Al Capone crowd got a clue from Al Capone, you know, because
from Charlie Peace.
From Charlie.
Yeah.
Charlie Peace. Because he seemed to have been the first burglar with the idea of using a violin case, not to keep a violin in, but jemmies and things. Well, I mean, the Al Capone boys used a violin case to keep their sawn-off shotguns in, isn't it?
Well, a lot of people have said, you know, that the British were actually the instigators of most things.
Oh, yes, well,
I'm sure they're right.
We're the best.
This is LBC Radio. I'm Mike Allen. My guest is Jonathan Goodman, the crime historian, and Bill Waddell, the curator of the Black Museum. Just let me remind you that the fire started at King's Cross this evening between 7:30 and 7:40, and people are concerned about relatives that might have been travelling through the area at that time on public transport. This phone number is for those of you who are concerned. It's 01 if you're outside of town, 834 7777. That number again, 834 7777.
Hello, it's me again, your ever-friendly sofa bed shop man. Look, the festive season will soon be upon us, and you know what that means. Aunt Madge and Uncle Bill will suddenly announce that they're coming to stay for the duration, and you'll end up with a dodgy back from sleeping in your old armchair. So why not come along to the sofa bed shop? We've got hundreds of superb sofa beds in stock at prices that will amaze you. The sofa bed shops are in Coney Hatch Lane, Muswell Hill, Letchworth Drive, Bromley, and Hornchurch Road, Hornchurch. Or see local press for details. The sofa bed shop, for a comfortable Christmas present and future.
Does your car have power steering? Does your car have a power steering problem? If so, call the experts. Power Steering Services of Greenwich on 01 853 3343. Power Steering Services of Greenwich, a fast-fitting while-you-wait service, is available for most makes of British and European vehicles on 01 853 3343.
This is LBC Radio 97.3 FM, as you might have heard. We're anticipating at least 40 people killed at the fire at King's Cross earlier this evening, and if you are concerned about people who were travelling through that area on the train services, the phone number to call is 834 7777, 01 834 7777. Needless to say, we'll be bringing you frequent bulletins on that through the night here on LBC Radio. My guest this hour, though, talking about the Black Museum at Scotland Yard, Jonathan Goodman and Bill Waddell. Bill is the curator of the Black Museum. Bill, how long have you been in charge of that post?
Well, I've been there 6 years now, Mike, and as a criminologist, it of course is the most intriguing place to work.
Was it a job that you really angled for, that it came up? And
well, I can't say that was strictly true. I had a feeling about criminology which wasn't very satisfying to myself, in that I seemed, in studying criminology, I spent more time studying the criminals and learning how deprived or depraved they were and the reasons for it than we did studying the actual crimes. And so I started to study four main aspects round each of the crimes that we have in there. That's the forensic pathology, the forensic sciences, the law, the legal implications, and the investigative techniques. And it's from those 4 points of view that I study each of the crimes that we've got in the museum. It's rather intriguing when you start to study a crime in detail like that you come up with a lot of ideas and observations on the actual person who's committed it in consequence.
How different are the actual criminals from the characters that we read about, even going back to, I'm just trying to think of things, so say the turn of the century, 1920s detectives, Raffles or something is a name that comes to mind.
Raffles, yes.
The detective, or even
I think there is the thing there that nature tends to imitate art. Ever since the Minder series, I can't go into a used car place without seeing Arthur Daly. You know. Now, these chaps were there before. Now, I don't know whether the program has turned them into Arthur Dalys, or whether I, seeing the program, are recognizing them as Arthur Daly.
Well, that's an interesting point, because George Raft, the actor, was much beloved by American hoodlums, because he presented this very suave, beautifully dressed image of a gangster in the movie roles that he played. And they took him very close to heart, because he escalated their image in their eyes, and some would say in the public's eyes. So he was considered to be very much one of the boys. And
I mean, as you say, I mean, this did happen, that the Capone people dressed like Raft or like Edward G. Robinson, you know.
Sure.
And so it's interesting that...
this is chicken and egg syndrome, isn't it?
The fiction can become the fact.
Yeah.
I do feel we've got to keep these things in perspective to a certain extent. It's amazing that some of these criminals are, to a certain extent, becoming folk heroes. One's got to get down to the basics of why they were criminals, and in many cases they've killed, they've robbed, and they've injured people in the course of the robbery. And when you read or you hear about people like Biggs in South America, he's become a bit of a folk hero. The fact is, he was involved in a very big robbery. True, it was £2,400,000, but in 1987, we're talking about a £16 million heist there. The death, the sad, unfortunate death of the train driver over a year later, doesn't really absolve what they did. But he's tended to become a bit of a folk hero in consequence. But Craze are another case, and yes, it really is a nonsense.
And going back to Charlie Peace, of course,
and as time goes
100 years ago, I mean, he became dear old Charlie, dashing Charlie Peace. There were novels written about him, full-length books. I mean, if television had been around at the time, there would have been a miniseries.
No doubt. I was just thinking, I was just casting my mind back, another example of this going back earlier than the museum, but would have been, for example, the highwaymen, like Richard Turpin or something like that. Very much a hero.
Yeah, Gentleman Johnny. I mean, they were the sort of Raffles of the 18th century.